Hello, everyone. So, this one's all about the singer Beyonce. She has just released a new art book to go with her tour. And in that art book, she has released her birth certificate. So, we now know her time of birth finally. And it may be of no surprise to some of you what her rising sign is. It might be to others, but I want to show you why I think that this fits perfectly. Of course, it does because it's her birth time. So, I'm going to show you her chart and you'll see what her ascendant is, and that is, drumroll, Aries. So, of course, when you find out something like that and you're like, oh, yeah, of course it is, of course it's Aries, and it just obviously suits her down to the ground. But what I want to show you her chart for, it's not just to show you her ascendant, it's to show you why such a person, so successful, so wealthy, has so many challenging planets in her chart. So many. She's got three debilitated planets in her chart and a lot of planets in the sixth house, and all of the planets heaped up on one side of the lunar nodes, what is called a Kal Amrita Yoga in Indian astrology. This is quite a tumultuous chart in many ways. And I want to explain why, if you just approach it on the surface level, that's not going to show you the full picture. So if you listening to this think that, okay, I've got some debilitated planets or afflictions in my birth chart or whatever it might be, you obviously therefore have to go a bit deeper to show the full picture. You have to go into the specifics. You have to go into the Vargas, especially the divisional charts, to show what are the underlying strengths. And in that case, if there are underlying strengths, therefore those challenges on the surface are, in a way, the way I think of it anyway, because I've got my own fair share of debilitated planets. The way I think of it is when you have a weakness on the surface of things, you've got a challenge, in other words. It doesn't mean that it's just weak. Weak is probably not a good word to use in one way, even though the planet is weak when it's debilitated. Let's say the planet is challenged in that position. When you also then have an underlying strength, that challenge actually becomes your success. Because if you didn't have a challenge, in other words, you wouldn't have any reason to rise to a challenge and then overcome the challenge and then come out on top, essentially. So this is why, one reason why, not the only reason why, and I'll show you in her particular chart why, with somebody with so much success having three debilitated planets, why that's mitigated by a lot of things, but why the challenge itself has made her rise to the top in a way of her profession. So I'll just run through the chart very quickly and then we'll get into the specifics. Aries rising, again, even if you just look at her physically, and I've done separate videos and presentations on physical attributes of signs and sidereal signs more specifically. When I talk about physical attributes, I'm not talking about someone's tropical sign. Your physical attributes are represented by your sidereal sign because that is where we're talking about the actual physical space, the constellations, the star signs. So she is, and by the way, she also has tropical Aries rising anyway. So she's a double, we would say maybe Aries rising. When you look at her, she's absolutely an Aries rising. Compare her to all of the other Aries risings I did in that presentation. And again, if you're not familiar with that, you can search it on this platform. I think I called it physical appearance of signs or something. So when you see an Aries, they generally have sort of high cheekbones. They have kind of a sharpness about them in their face that could be like a heart-shaped face as well. They have a pronounced brow usually and eyes that are quite striking or that have this kind of piercing effect. So just look at any Aries rising and you're going to see this. At any rate, she's Aries rising, but look where her ruler is. The ruler of her chart, the ruler of her ascendant, Mars, is debilitated in Cancer. So this is a mixed bag for sure because, and I've talked about this previously, I've written a lot about this in the past about when you have even pro athletes who have Mars in Cancer and you're wondering, how the hell does this pro athlete have Mars in Cancer? The Mars, the planet of competition, of energy and drive and ambition and will and willpower and motivation, weak. Well, you have to have obviously a mitigating factor. It's on its own just a challenge. And I'll show you plenty of other charts with people who just have Mars and Cancer who are challenged and maybe who have never overcome that challenge. As many people as there are successful people in the world. Think about every successful person you can think of in the world. There's a thousand others behind them who haven't become successful. So let's not forget about that. But this person with the debilitated Mars, you can see Mars is in Cancer. Not only that, it's almost exactly conjoined Rahu, the North Node, which blocks Mars. That's a whole other I'll get into in a minute. But Mars in Cancer is actually exchanging with Moon in Scorpio, and the Moon is exactly debilitated by degree at 3 degrees. Another debilitated planet. But in this case, these two weak planets are swapping signs. So this is important because it means that even though she has a weakness of Mars and a weakness of the Moon, they swap signs, and that weakness then becomes her skill in a way, becomes her talent at overcoming it, becomes her strength. And this is why you can almost see Moon in Cancer post exchange, we might say, and Mars in Scorpio post exchange. Now they're becoming really strong. Again, it doesn't take away the weakness, the challenge, but again, exactly, it's the weakness itself that creates the environment for this person to succeed. The challenge is what makes them succeed. So that's why, by the way, so many astrologers talk about this. When you have so many trines and beneficial aspects, people call beneficial, and Jupiter's and Venus doing some wonderful things, and Moon and all of these things, and lots of exaltation. I can show you as many charts of people with exalted planets who are not successful and who also are not happy in life, because it's almost like it's almost like the worst kind of mixed bag in a way when you have so many ideals in your mind about what you want to achieve in life, so many exaltations, and no kind of struggle in a way that kind of would lend itself to this kind of trying harder. Essentially, that's what when the planet is weak, you have to try harder. And again, though, in this case, as I've shown with Beyonce, there has to be mitigating factors because if it's just weakness, it's not going to go anywhere. But if it's a weakness mixed with a strength, then that challenge makes them rise to the occasion. But like I said, conversely, when you have a lot of exalted planets, you could have so many great expectations out of life, and then it just doesn't reach the mark. Like life doesn't ever rise to um that ideal you have in your mind. And then on top of that, if you have a lot of exalted planets and they're just everything looks easy, those people don't always actually achieve a great deal. They might have been handed a great deal as well in other ways, but they themselves might not feel that they've done anything significant with their life. I can show you charts of those people too, and I've met enough people over the years, clients who have a lot of exalted planets who are not happy, but they have so many expectations. This person with so many debilitated planets has worked hard to get to where she's at. Now let's face it, if there's anything we can say about Beyonce, whether you like her or not, whether you like her music or not, I mean, we don't know her personally, we can say that she is really a hard worker. You know, she's done an awful lot to get to where she is. At any rate, this is this kind of Mars working harder to overcompensate for this weakness, a personal sense of weakness and needing to prove herself. We saw that with Michael Jordan, I think it was. Yeah, Mars in Cancer again, Michael Jordan. Serena Williams has Mars in Cancer. This kind of fighting to prove yourself, constantly trying to prove yourself, which, by the way, also can work against a person. And this is another thing we're going to talk about in this chart when we talk about Venus debilitated. That's a problem. But Mars in Cancer, again, conjunct Rahu, and this is where we see the Aruda Lagna, the attained ascendant, because Aries is her ascendant. That's who she is. And again, physically, literally. Mars is in Cancer. That's where she puts a lot of focus. And it's in the fourth house. And what is she known as? She's known as, like, to her fans, is like the mother, Queen Bee. Um, but what is the result of that? We have to look at the relationship between Aries and Mars. So we count from Aries to Mars, which is 4 signs away, and we count the same again, and we end up in Libra. Now, I do keep an open mind about this, even though Parashuras states clearly you cannot have the Aruda in the first or the seventh house. It's a mirror image of your ascendant, so you can't have it in the first or the seventh. And the rule is you have to count 10 from there, the most visible house from there. And then if you count 10 from Libra, you end up back in Cancer. This is why the Aruda Lagna is placed in Cancer traditionally. I do think it fits in many ways. When you think about, again, Queen Bee, Beyonce, when you think about her drive, Mars, when you think about her, Cancerian nature as well that we see, but also this kind of Rahu Mars drive. She doesn't just kind of do it like where she's trying hard. She does it to extreme. She does it to the point where it's like she blows you away, kind of what she can do and what she has done. And I guess this is Rahu taking it into a kind of the stratosphere in a way, and ha always having a different spin on it, always having to kind of, when you think about the fourth house as well in Cancer, it's very much about roots, and and that is a big theme that's playing into her music as well, always, and her mother being a big part of that, especially. And it's interesting to see as well right now with her mother bringing out her own memoir and all of that, and the connection with her mother. Now, there is definitely complexities here because apart from what we might see publicly, there are a lot of complexities in this chart personally. And when we get to the relationship now, we're going to see that more so. But even with her mother, this exchange between the fourth and eighth Lord, Mars, Moon exchange, that's complicated. I mean, her mother's, by the way, her mother's memoir is called Matriarch, So there's definitely a lot of complexity around and power dynamics going on around her mother relationship and her. We don't see that, of course. But anyway, that's Mars, Rahu in Cancer, Moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio obviously is a challenge. Even with the exchange, we have to consider that this is challenged, just like our Mars is challenged. This is an emotional challenge. But again, she's risen to the challenge. And this is now a debilitated moon in the eighth house. Eighth house moon itself is, as we'll see as well with Venus in the sixth, what is called the Marna Stana, this death-like place. Marna is death, Stana is place. So Moon and Scorpio obviously are a challenge, but Moon in the eighth is also a challenge. And this is now again a double negative. So this is another concept you might not have heard of before, but essentially what happens is when you have a planet in its quote unquote worst sign and worst house, that's like a double negative. It almost like it kills off the negative indications of the sign. So again, Moon is debilitated in Scorpio and it's in the eighth house where it goes to die in a way. It's obviously the language is intense, obviously, with Mara and Astana, but it's just the sense of that the significations of the planet are not able to express itself in that house. Moon in the eighth house is like dying. What is dying? It's Moon in Scorpio. So actually, it's a double negative. And so, same would be the case for Sun debilitated in the 12th, Jupiter debilitated in the third, and so on. Mars debilitated in the seventh. You get the picture. It's like it kills off in a way the weakness of the planet. So again, this is why it's this double negative. And again, this exchange with Mars is like another double negative in a way, or a compensation or mitigating factor. So again, it's on the surface of things, it's weak, but underlying it all, there's a lot of strengths. And anyway, I don't think so much of Moon in Scorpio as weak per se in another way because I mean, it is weak, obviously, it's debilitated, but because it's ruled by Mars and this relationship that Moon Mars have anyway, even if they weren't exchanging like they are in her chart, Moon Mars have this interesting relationship, because Mars is about strength, and but even though the Moon is debilitated and weak in Scorpio, the reason why it's weak is that it weakens the mind to dwell on negativity, to dwell on catastrophe, to always be catastrophizing and to anticipate and to try and be ahead of the curve, trying to, get ahead of everything and get in control. She is a very controlling person, and she's in control of every step of the way in terms of her production of her shows and her albums and everything else. When you listen to her music, and it's the one reason, if I was to give her a criticism, the one reason why I don't like her music per se is that she, I think, overworks her music. She overworks her lyrics. That's literally how she works. She layers and layers and layers and layers and layers until she feels like it's done. But for me, that's like an overworking. That's also a Mars in Cancer, but it's also this Moon is Scorpio exchange. And the Moon is the voice. This kind of like acrobatics with the voice, the vocals. For me, there's nothing sort of edgy about that. There's nothing kind of raw about it. It's so overworked. I know that's a big criticism. Apologies for Beyonce fans. but I'm not a fan of her music. I'm interested in her as a person. So that's the moon. What else to say? It's almost like exactly conjunct her Uranus, which is this kind of surprising, sort of otherworldly, almost alien-like kind of quality I think that she has as well with her voice and what she does. Um, anyway, that's Moon and Mars. Mars Rahu, I was going to say something about that. So Mars Rahu is not the best combination. Rahu in the fourth house. There are definitely some issues here going on with her mother relationship and her as a mother and all of that. I mean, she has had a couple of miscarriages as well, so she's had some challenges in that respect as well. But I think with her own mother, I mean, and her own sense of happiness and peace within herself. You don't have somebody striving to be the most successful artist in the world without having some issues at home. Let's face it. It doesn't matter what they appear like. When somebody needs adoration from the world, there's some lack there. Rahu in the fourth house in Cancer especially is this striving for happiness. And in a way, that's what makes people so unhappy. It's like I wrote about it in my book Rahu Dasha. When you think I think I have a whole chapter on it. The pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness is what makes us miserable, essentially. And this is like Rahu in the fourth house or in Cancer, or in this case, both Rahu and Cancer in the fourth house itself. So I think that she's constantly trying hard and hard and hard and always working hard and always trying to get the adoration of people. Now, that actually comes down to let's talk about the other debilitated planet in her chart, which is again a double negative. So we have to talk about that. But Venus. Venus, her seventh lord, is in the sixth house, debilitated by degree. So not just debilitated, but debilitated by degree. Now, I have to be careful with my words here because this is going to offend somebody somewhere, I'm sure. But essentially, when you have Venus debilitated, and again, even though it's mitigated by this double negative in a way, again, the double negative is now this Venus is debilitated and it's in its Maranastana placement. Venus in the sixth is yet another placement. Like Venus in the sixth house is weak. Venus is in Virgo weak. So it's kind of like double negative. Um, so that could create a positive. Obviously, it's created a positive. It's Venus. Like, look at all the money she's amassed. Look at all the fans she's amassed. Look at all the wealth. Look at all the luxury. The issue here is when you have Venus in the sixth house and debilitated, and especially in her relationship, and she's had challenges in her relationship, and I think there's going to be more, unfortunately. I don't really want to predict this, but I think she is going to have issues in her relationship going forward because Venus is now activated in the Dasha sequence, in the Vimshottari Dasha. She just started Venus Dasha in November 2024. This is activating this Venus in the sixth house, debilitated by degree, exact degree. So that means it's also debilitated in Navamsha because at the end of Virgo, in the Rashi is the end of Virgo, or is the Virgo Rashi Navamsha. So it's doubling up its weakness again. It's like even more, there's no kind of underlying support here at all. Again, she's had problems in her relationship. I mean, it's well documented now. It's been at least reported anyway publicly that her husband had an affair. There's been a lot of problems. And even if you follow her and you've seen her in interviews and you see how she engages with them, it's the one area of her life you can see that she's a bit wobbly on. Let's put it that way. It's kind of, you could see almost like I'm not just reading into this, by the way. This is something that's said about Venus in the sixth. It's this longing to be loved. It's this need to be loved, like excessive need to be loved. And again, she's trying to get it from all her fans, but from her husband, it's like you could see them interacting when she was on tour, and the way she was speaking about him and to him over the phone, she just seemed like a very insecure person. I mean, I'm just going to call it. Like again, that's no judgment. That's looking at the chart and looking at this Venus in the sixth house debilitated. I'm not judging her. I'm just judging the chart, right? She seemed to be quite insecure about their relationship and about what he thought about her. And there was some scene where she was fitting into a dress that she hadn't fit into for a while. And it was like, oh my God, if Beyonce, and just look at her, is having insecurities about fitting into a dress. Where's that coming from? Where's that insecurity coming from? And so it's very much around tied because she was having a conversation with her husband about it. It's very much tied in with her husband. Venus is the seventh lord in the sixth house. That's problematic. Now, that could also mean that this phase that she's moving into now of Venus is going to be problematic for him, not just her. It could be that it's problematic for him as well. So Venus is challenged, and it's almost exactly a couple of degrees within Pluto. So there's definitely some power struggles going on here as well in the sixth house. Now there are mitigating factors apart from Venus debilitated in the sixth, because you can see here as well is that Venus Mercury is exalted. So this is a classic sort of Nietzsche Banga yoga. Nietzsche Banga yoga means Nietzsche is debilitation, Banga is reversal. It essentially mitigates the debilitated planet when you have an exalted planet right beside it in the same sign as it, even. So here we have Mercury exalted propping up Venus. So actually, it's Mercury that's challenged in this case, not Venus. Venus kind of is just turned on its head, and it's kind of like the weakness becomes a strength. And again, you can see it quite clearly that she has all the strengths of Venus. I mean, apart from her physicals, beauty and Venus type thing, all the wealth, all the money, the relationship and everything. She is married for a long time. Again, there is a problem here though, because this is the problem. Even when a planet is Nichabanga, as in mitigated, a lot of people say cancelled. I don't say cancelled. It's not cancelled. The weakness is there. You can see it. When somebody has to, you know, again, I'm going to have to be careful in my words here, but when Venus is in Pisces, there is an unconditional love, regardless of how somebody looks, regardless of how somebody is, whether they're successful or not, whoever you are, whatever you do, I'm going to love you. When Venus is in Virgo, there are conditions attached. I will love you if you are X, Y, or Z. So there's a lot of that going on for her, essentially. So it still is a weak Venus, even if there is a mitigating factor here. You can also see Jupiter and Saturn are conjoined here. Saturn has been a big player in her success and from early on. And actually, because she came into Saturn Dasher very early on at the age of, well, she was really actually a baby. But Saturn obviously is 19 years long, and she ended it at 19 years of age. But it was actually she started singing when she was 10 or something, or she began singing earlier. And I think she was in a group at 10, and then in her teens, she started Destiny's Child very early on. This is Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of the 10th and 11th for an Aries ascendant. And Saturn is exalted in the Dashamsha, by the way. You can see here. And it's also, again, ruling the 10th. And in this case, the Dashamsha has Taurus rising, and it's got Rahu Mars in the ascendant. So this brings all of that quality into her career. She's driven in that way. But again, the Saturn now ruling the ninth and 10th, the most powerful planet for Taurus ascendant in exaltation in the sixth of work. She's been working hard for a long time. Again, she entered, let me just show you, entered Saturn when she was a baby, right up to 19. Then in Mercury, Mercury is with Saturn, of course, here and exalted, though it's kind of, again, challenged in a way by being with a debilitated planet. It is exalted and in its own sign, here, own sign exalted. So it's a very strong place, obviously, for Mercury. And it's within Mercury that she achieves a lot of success as well, where she also got married as well. So there's activation there of that Venus in another way. Um, so the other thing to say about that is that when she went into Ketu, again, the reason why I wanted to do this chart at all, why I find it fascinating, is not just all of the weakness in her chart, the apparent weakness on the surface, but then how these, you know, dashes could be perceived as one way and then it turns out another way. And I think it's a good example for that. So Ketu Dasha, which really lasted for 7 years up until the end of last year. I mean, she was continually being successful in recent years. She's released a couple of really successful albums like Lemonade, Renaissance, now this Cowboy Carter. All of these are really successful. Ketu is in the 10th house, the most prominent house, and it activates that Saturn there, which is in the sixth house. And so again, with the Mercury leading to Ketu, you can see it's all work, 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 and success and drive and ambition. And Saturn in the sixth house is one of the best places to put Saturn, um, for work, for success, you know? And again, because Saturn is anyway exalted and Ketu itself is in its own sign in the Dashamsha in the seventh sign with Jupiter there as well, you can see that this, on the surface of it, might show that there are some insecurities, yes, and uncertainties around what she's doing. But also the other side of that is that she's working hard and overcoming those and challenging herself to do things differently and to go into her roots even. Ketu is very much about the past and looking at the way she's bringing her culture back into her music, which really wasn't there in the beginning. And you can see that in recent years in the Ketu Dasha. So anyway, now she's in Venus. And for 20 years, it's the longest one. And this Venus, in a way, again, though a double negative and creates a positive and there's strength here, there's also that weakness, this underlying weakness that we might not see, but she's likely to sense or feel or deal with in her personal life and in her relationship more so. Interestingly enough, as well, in the sign dashes, Taurus and Libra are both activated right now, the Venus signs, which Venus rules the second and seventh sign for an Aries. These are called Marika placements. These are like challenging placements as well because of that. Again, I would say around relationships, her relationship, her partner, her husband. Um, so there's that. I don't want to talk any more about that because that I mean I don't want to put a downer on that. But essentially, I do think that despite the Venus being Venus, and Venus is very powerfully again positioned, very prominent in her dashamsha of career. So on this, again, career-wise, this is all good. Venus is in the 10th house. It rules the ascendant of the dashamsha. It's exchanging with Rahu in one way, but then also exchanging with an exalted Saturn, and Rahu is also exalted, by the way, in Taurus in the first house. So this Venus is picking up both exaltations of Rahu and Saturn in the 10th house, with Sun in the 10th house. So you can see, okay, career-wise, this is very good. Personally and in a relationship, I don't know, because you've got, again, debilitated in the Rashi and in the Navamsha. And it's in the fifth house in the Navamsha. So there are some challenges there again that we might not see. And what we see though is the result of those challenges. I mean, you just read anything about her in any biography or anything online, you'll know that she's been through a lot of challenges to, you know, and overcome those. We don't see any of that though. And this is maybe a typical sort of moon in Scorpio kind of trait where she deals with those challenges, whether it's her miscarriages or whether whatever it is, whether with her husband cheating on her, whether whatever it is, she deals with those and she puts it into her music. And then what we see is the result. And again, that's a good analogy, perhaps. Maybe I'll leave it with that point. That's a really good analogy in terms of it's not just an analogy, it's her life story, right? So we have to be mindful here and sensitive. But essentially, when you see so many debilitated planets and then them mitigated in so many different ways, you have the challenge which she's been through. We don't necessarily see her going through that challenge, the heartbreak, that, collapsing in a heap, kind of having to deal with all of that. We see her overcoming the challenge, and then the result of that, we only see the result of it. We see the sort of what she produces in her art, the songs that she writes about in terms of overcoming whatever. So she puts it into that. So that's another thing to think about when you have, again, debilitated and mitigated planets. So I hope you got something from that. If you yourself have debilitated planets, I'm going to release a separate podcast, which I recorded all about debilitated planets later on in the year, when planets actually do go into debilitation later on in the year. And that's going to go into more detail about how each planet is mitigated. You don't even have to have the kind of mitigations I showed you in her chart to work on the planets that help mitigate that weak, debilitated planet. You can just work on what those planets represent in order for you to boost up that debilitated planet. And so that podcast goes through all of that. And if you have any questions about her chart or any of the debilitated planets or any of these Maranastana placements I talked about, feel free, post below. If you have any questions, I would love to hear your questions. Any thoughts, post below. And until next time.